So Eren Yeager is a very hard character to do a profile on because on one hand he's very simple, straightforward, and morally consistent, at least by Attack on Titan standards. On the other, if you want to look into some of the more esoteric stuff, you have time travel, you have future memories, you have is Eren actually the big bad or the big good, depending on your perspective of the series. And he's been manipulating things this whole time by the abilities of the Attack Titan. It's kind of hard to make a determination. So what I'm trying to say is he has a human nature and a Titan nature, and sometimes they work together, and sometimes they oppose each other. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is Eren is the Messiah of Attack on Titan. He is the only begotten son of Ymir, and he has two natures that are in a hypostatic union, one human and one Titan. But back to the character in general. Regardless of whether we're talking about Eren as a Titan or as a human, the one thing that I think unifies both of them is the desire for freedom. Freedom is the very strong theme regarding Eren from the first episode, where he wants to be able to leave the walls, that he wants to be free from the Titans. Armin also wants to be free to go see the ocean. And it continues to be a theme all throughout the series. What they're trying to get freedom from and what freedom means shifts a bit, but Eren, I think, even says, all I've ever wanted is to be free at one point in time. And you can even see this in the final season, part 2, where Floch and Jean are talking, and Floch tells a crying Jean, we're finally free from constant fear of the outside world. We can live our lives the way that we want to live them. Also, of course, the Scouts have the wings of freedom on their uniform, signifying their desire to fight for the freedom of humanity. And then Eldia once the secrets of their existence are revealed. And here we start to run into the issue of what does freedom mean? And this is always an extremely difficult topic. Freedom in a political sense generally refers to the freedom from the government influencing your life. But that doesn't really ever seem to be a big thing for Eren. I mean, we talk about it a couple of times, I guess, with some of the things the royal government was doing, and they're overthrown for being tyrannical. At the same time, though, he does support a military junta and eventually like a fascist youth movement. So obviously that's not the main focus of his freedom. It's a more abstract concept. And to do this, we have to take kind of another philosophical detour and look at the concept of free will. Now, to me at least, it's one of the great mysteries of the world. And I say it's a mystery not because it's not something I've studied, but because it's just a very incoherent idea. So on one hand, people say free will is the freedom to choose, or the freedom to have done otherwise. At the same time, though, people make decisions, generally speaking, based on who they are as a person. When Eren makes a decision, he makes it because he's either trying to protect his friends or he's trying to be free. So you can say Eren has free will, but generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, you can tell the decision he's going to make, and he's going to make a particular decision because that's who he is as a person. But is that a deterministic thing? Is him making decisions based on who he is as a person and not choosing to do otherwise indicate that he doesn't have free will? So that's kind of one, because if we're just describing free will as the ability to just be completely random, then you get into an issue where it's indeterminism, but people still don't really have control over their own lives. The two definitions, I think, of free will that I tend to like is firstly that it's something that agents, that is sentient creatures, inherently have, in that they can be causes as well as consequences. But I think in the context of Attack on Titan, freedom normally means the freedom to do what you want, or more specifically, the freedom to live within what is appropriate to your character. Which I know this isn't a Catholic show, but that's kind of the Catholic definition, is the free will is the freedom to do good. Or in a political context, it's the freedom to be able to do the right thing and to act within your moral conscience. And within the context of Attack on Titan, it's mostly done in the concept of freedom from fear. It's humanity is oppressed, not necessarily because of the government, but more so they can't leave the walls, they have limited resources, they can't explore the rest of the world, and their actions are constantly restricted because of their fear of the Titans. And so Eren wants to kill the Titans so humanity can be free. And then when he finds out that the royal government is repressing information and they're preventing humanity from fighting the Titans, he wants to destroy them because they're preventing people from being able to live in a way that's consistent with their nature. And then once we get on to kind of the third kind of phase of the show where we start talking about Marley and Eldia, the focus becomes destroying Eldia's enemies so the Eldian people can finally be free to just live their lives. While it's kind of difficult to determine, I would imagine if Eren was able to make his own world, which he kind of does, he would not have any real particular desire for how Eldia would be run, so long as it's just kind of free from the influence of external nations, it's not in constant threat, and the people within it can kind of go about their daily lives. If they want to like elect the government that does more or does less, then that's fine, but they aren't being controlled or pressured by a external influence. And maybe I'm just not explaining that very well. But the first aspect of Eren is the freedom. The second is his loyalty. Eren is unconditionally loyal to his friends and to his people, generally speaking in that order. While he's not really aware of Eldia being a nation state at the beginning of the show, he does have a sense of loyalty to humanity in general. There's a phrase I once heard, I forget who it was to describe, but that they hated people but loved humanity. And I think that's often something you see in Attack on Titan, where collectively people might be stupid or whatever, but there is something sublimely noble about humans and their struggle for freedom and their struggle to try to do what they think is the right thing, even if it might be tragic. But Eren, I do think, has a loyalty to his country and to his people. And to a certain extent, I think you can view the rumbling and a lot of the actions he takes later on as the idea that my people come first and everything else is second. And I'm going to act in alliance with what I think is the greater good for my people and the greater amount of freedom for them, regardless of what people think about it morally, and regardless of what it requires them to do. Eren, I think, is also unconditionally loyal to his friends and the other scouts. Some people like to say that he's some sort of sociopath who doesn't care about human life, or he never cared about his friends. I think from the very beginning, Eren has shown that he loves his friends, even if it's not necessarily romantic. It's debatable in Mikasa's case, but he's always cared about them, and he's always been willing to fight and sacrifice his life for them. And I think to a certain extent, you can see his actions as being born out of a desire for his friends to be free, for Armin and Mikasa and John and everyone else to be able to do what they want in life, rather than constantly be fighting a losing battle at whatever omnipresent threat of the weak there is. And so I think if you want to take a lot of Eren's Titan aspects and kind of put them into the background, what you're left with is a very earnest, straightforward man who wants to serve his people, to protect his friends, and is always fighting for personal and collective freedom. And to that end, everything else outside of that is kind of secondary. And because I think his morality is so kind of straightforward in a lot of ways, and so kind of different from, I guess, kind of the more conventional morality you see in some of the other scouts, it just seems very odd. I think in a lot of ways he probably is more like Erwin than any of the other scouts, because he has this kind of vision, and that can often kind of come first over the immediate needs and feelings of those around him. So I've seen some people say like Eren became a sociopath, or he went crazy, or he became evil once he did the rumbling. I don't know, it seems entirely consistent with the character of the guy who killed the people who were trying to sex traffic Mikasa in the first episode. And the people who were trying to, or rather, in the boy who declared that he was going to exterminate all of the Titans so humanity could be free. And the guy who said, we got to get rid of the royal government because they're lying to the people and they're restricting the freedom to know about their heritage. It's I think, very, very consistent. What more changes than Eren himself is what the stakes are, what's going on, and what the people around him are doing. And I think that's an aspect of it. But generally speaking, I think I like to say there's two characters I think in Attack on Titan that have been pretty much 100% morally consistent. I'd say him and Dot Pixis. Because in a sense, they both just kind of have this very clear idea of what the collective or greater good is. And that always comes first before their personal desires or their personal feelings. Now, as time goes on, Eren does get more depressive, quiet, and I don't know if you want to say cynical or just in general sad. So there's two kind of ways you can interpret this. You can interpret it one way that, which I tend towards a bit more, even if it might not be that supported, that by this point he's just had severe PTSD. He's been more or less fighting constantly since he was a rather young child. He saw his mother eaten in front of him. He joined the military at a very young age. He watched all of his comrades around him just get constantly eaten and killed. And every time it seemed like, oh, they had finally killed enough people to achieve freedom, something else popped up or some other crazy thing happened. And he never really seemed to get anywhere. And so in that context, you can see the rumbling as him being, it's almost, if we want to do maybe a strange comparison to the plagues of Egypt, where God kept sending plagues on Egypt, each more and more horrible than the last, to try to achieve his objective of freedom for his people. And then eventually he just had to do something so horrific that it forced them to free them. And I guess in a sense you could almost see the rumbling like that, where Eren just feels he's out of options. He's not going to live much longer. He's in a chess game where there's basically only one move left that he can make, which may break or make them. But one way or another, the rumbling will be a finality. Either it succeeds and the rest of the world's destroyed and the Eldian race is safe for all time, or it fails and the rest of the world exterminates them. But as it says in the song, this is my last war. And I think that the music, particularly in the later seasons, really kind of does well dealing with Eren's character arc. So at the beginning, it's very upbeat. It's very, I'm the hunter, you're my prey, hopeful about achieving freedom. And then once you get to My War, it's just, you get this guy who's not very old, but he just looks like he's completely run down. Everything he's tried to do has just led to bigger and bigger messes, and he just can't keep doing it forever. And you see this with a lot of scouts, particularly when John just breaks down in season 4 in the final season part 2, so he can't take it anymore. And then in the rumbling song, obviously it starts off with, I just wanted to do the right thing. And I think that's often kind of part of what Eren's tried to do. But he's just kind of this shell of who he used to be emotionally. And maybe just because of a side note before we transition to part 2 of this video, his relationship with Mikasa is, and I understand some of that comes out later on in the manga. I've only obviously watched the anime up to this point, which includes the final season part 2. But I think it is an interesting question as to whether or not Eren has feelings for Mikasa of a romantic nature. He definitely has very strong feelings for her. He definitely sees her as his sister, and as, along with Armin, one of his very closest friends who he'd do anything for. But it's not exactly clear throughout the series if he's in love with her. I think it's stated that he is, maybe in the manga, but I'm just going by the anime. I'd say there's probably a 60% chance that he is, but I also kind of like to go with the meme that he's married to Eldia, so he doesn't have time for his country. He's like a Lord Kitchener or a Cecil Rhodes or a Charles Gordon, where he's too busy conquering the world for Eldia to have time for things like women or children. And he's married to Eldia. He's married to the Eldian people, and that's his goal. And things like sex and marriage and stuff like that are just very secondary to whatever it is that he wants to achieve. Although if you want to go by fan fiction, it's because Levi is his one true love. So that's the alternative. I also think it's interesting. It's very, very subtly implied, and it might be a crackpot theory. I think there's some chance that Historia might be the true love of his life, and that her child is his, because that's fairly strongly implied, because they're talking and then just out of nowhere, he's just like, hey, do you want to have a baby? And that can be interpreted as they won't turn Historia into a Titan so long as she's pregnant, or it could be that, look, do you want to have a child with me? And I could see her being maybe the one person he's confessed all of his plans to behind the scenes, and the one person who has kind of actually provided him with guidance on a lot of things. So I don't know if there's that much evidence for it, but it is kind of an interesting thought. And now this brings us to Eren's Titan nature, and this is kind of a mess. I'm not criticizing the show for doing a bad job. It's just any time you deal with prophecies or the future or time travel or something, it becomes almost impossible to kind of differentiate between them. And I guess to a certain extent, that's kind of the point, that Eren and the other characters largely can't differentiate between them either. A thing in Dune that was very prevalent was the idea that to know the future is to be trapped by it. That if you know what's going to happen, subconsciously, even if you're actively trying to struggle against it, you're going to do things to cause it to happen. But the way that you act based on knowing a certain prophecy is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's what leads to it. And maybe if you hadn't have known the prophecy, something completely different would have happened. So if we're going by that, and there's a lot of evidence that Eren has a lot of knowledge, when he actually picks it up is kind of vague, whether he's always had it since he got the attack titan from his father, whether he got a lot of it when he kissed Historia's hand, or when Ymir gave him full control of the founding titan, and how much he had at particular spots. It's quite clear that all of this had a lot of influence on him. But then we also get in kind of the question of how does knowledge of the future work? Because in some cases, how knowledge of the future works is you see all possible future outcomes, and as other people make decisions, some of them open up and some of them go away. And so you're trying to keep the conditions to lead to that particular future as consistent as possible. On the other hand, there's only one future and you're 100% tied to it. So the attack titan is said to have always been going forward and fighting for the freedom of the Eldian people. And so this reaches us the issue where the power of the attack titan is it has access to the memories of its future inheritors. And obviously the last person to hold it is Eren Yeager. So that means he's kind of the most powerful and he has the most influence on the other holders. So is the attack titan's desire for freedom solely as a result of Eren? That he has the most influence on it, and his memories are influencing all the prior people who held it, and in a really real sense, the attack titan is Eren? Or is it maybe that Eren is just kind of compatible with the attack titan because that's the way he is naturally, and the two are just kind of harmonious? Or could you even argue that it's the attack titan that's influencing him to be the way that he is? And obviously there's no real clear answer to this. A lot of this is kind of speculation. But it is what it is, and this is where we start to get into the bizarre, how does time travel work? Because we go back and we find that, like, Eren influenced his father to get the founding titan. So it's like, was all of history done by Eren? Or did he change history? And it just gets, but did that change him by, like, you just can't really. I feel to a certain extent, as important as it is, just dealing with time travel is so difficult, you almost have to shunt it a bit to the side. But that being, and there's also the question of, did Eren necessarily know exactly how the rumbling was going to play out? Did he know the decisions everyone was going to make? Or was this just one of many possibilities he saw, and he felt that he was trapped by it? Did he know the rumbling was going to fail? Did he think there was a chance it was going to succeed? It's all very murky and vague. And even though I get that this part of his character is extremely important, I just find it so difficult to try to deal with the chicken and the egg problem. And we don't really know the full extent of his abilities, even though we have all those cool scenes, which I think are the best episodes in the series, where we have the flashbacks where Zeke and him are looking at the past. We just don't really know what the limits are, if any, to them. I do think, though, once again, if we just want to, I think the best way to look at it is Eren does have this constant free spirit, whether that comes from the Attack Titan, or whether that's how he is, or whether the Attack Titan is Eren. He does have this desire for freedom, as I described earlier, and that permeates everything about him. And that's the unifying characteristic about him. And I think if he does seem, if I can make just another random reference, so in Vampire the Masquerade, you have humanity and the passive enlightenment as a way of dealing with your vampire nature or your desire to eat and kill things. Humanity is where, as much as possible, you try to maintain a normal human morality and a normal human emotional range. And the passive enlightenment are where you adopt a completely new morality. That's sort of alien to a human. It's taking ideas from like human ideology or human religion or something, but it's prioritizing those above basic human decency and basic human emotions. Not all of these paths are what we describe as evil. A lot of them prohibit people from killing innocents and propose some sort of collective good. But I think you could argue if Eren seems kind of alien, it's because he's placed this abstract idea of freedom, kind of like Erwin did, above his humanity. And so a lot of the other characters who have a more standard human thing view him as being a sociopath or view him as being the big bad or something like that. So I think that's the best I can really do to try to describe Eren and to try to analyze him. Like I said, he's a very simple character who wants freedom and wants to protect his friends. But he also could be the big bad or the big good of the entire series. It's very much up to interpretation, and that's part of why Attack on Titan is such a good series, is because you do have these complexities in the background. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. More content to come. Talk to you later.